Hey guys, Spirit of the Lie here. With the drop of the major April patch recently, I thought we'd do a bit of a recap slash bold prediction video of the biggest civilization winners and losers. In a month or two, we'll know from the stats and general consensus how things played out, and I'm sure not all my predictions will age well, but I'll share what I'm expecting and what I'm keeping an eye on. We'll start off with what I think are the biggest winners, naturally opening things up with infantry civs as a group. I know it kinda seems like bending the rules to lump them all together, but there are a lot here, all benefiting for the same reason. Men-at-arms becoming cheaper, faster, and being able to get arson in feudal age are all positive for a ton of civs that already have bonuses for infantry, from Goths to Slavs, Romans, Celts, Malians, Burmese, Armenians, Malay, Vikings, and of course Japanese. I'm not saying all of these are going to be top tier because of the changes, but undeniably any civilization with more than a passing interest in infantry is a big winner. This time it feels different than previous militia line buffs, as it actually simplifies them with a drop tech, along with early arson, lower starting cost, and being able to avoid archers as their big counter. That said, I don't think it has to show up as a massive spike in early wins, and it seems unlikely we'll go back to the dominance of Goths winning with a 20 militia spam in the early definitive edition days, for example. The point of a few men-at-arms isn't to end the game, and I think the bigger impact is they'll be able to run archers around your opponent's base and keep your economy at home a bit safer, forcing your opponent into more walling and repairing, etc. I expect that to ripple into a stronger castle age economy, where you've kept more of the action in your opponent's base than your own, leaving you a bit more untouched and leading to more mid-game wins, but we'll see how it plays out. Related to this, but worthy of their own spotlight, is then the Aztecs. While they do benefit from the swordsman line buffs, the main way they're improving is the Jaguar warrior, gaining much more attack, and being just as good or even better against infantry, but now more of a generalist even outside of that. What's interesting about Aztecs is several of their worst matchups are actually against other infantry civs, if you look at 1v1 stats. Anything that buffs the Jaguar warrior into being a more common unit just has to be good to some degree against those toughest matchups, and I predict at the least a big jump in Aztec play rate, with some of their weakest matchups also becoming more balanced. I don't think Aztecs will be top 20 in 1v1s or anything like that, but I think they'll be out of the bottom 5, which at least in 1v1 Arabia they've been hanging around for several years now. Moving on, I think our next winners have to be Chinese, Koreans, and Vietnamese, with the first two getting the new rocket cart and all three getting the Fire Lancer. The Fire Lancer in particular brings something anti-cavalry in melee with some upfront damage and the ability to hit ranged units at least within 4 tiles. It'll take some time for players to figure out what to expect from these units, and I actually think that's a small advantage for civs with access, even if the units themselves aren't overpowered, which so far seems to be the case. Moving on, another winner I expect is the Italians, who gain a new bonus for archer armor and a unique tech for hand cannon pass-through damage. Now, you could point to the fact Koreans already get +1/+1 armor from a free armor tech, and prior to their archer discount, that alone didn't seem to give them very good early archers. But remember, Italians are adding in a decent early bonus on top, with faster aging up. Archers are such a snowball unit that keeping them alive can be a big deal, and their late game army adding in hand cannons with almost perfect accuracy and pass-through damage is something to watch out for. Particularly in the early game, where Italians were struggling the most, I think we're going to see a noticeable improvement from the changes, but we'll know for sure in a month or two when the stats settle. Next up, for our last big winner, I'm going to bet on the Sicilians. They have a variety of new changes, including being able to start building donjons in Dark Age, though they won't fire until Feudal, along with then faster moving sergeants. Yes, they lose a bit of Pierce armor, and at high elo this may not be a huge deal, but below 1000 elo where a donjon in Sergeant Rush is very effective, with a nearly 70% win rate in the quickest games, the first donjon coming up earlier and sergeants moving faster just plays into that even more. Outside of donjon and sergeant rushes though, the stated intention is to make donjons on the way up to feudal to make a follow-up into archers or scouts a bit faster. Playing a more standard opening while having a defensive tower instead of the usual barracks, and considering the Sicilians' extra stone to begin the game, all fits together nicely into more conventional early aggression combined with some safety at home. So that's the biggest winners, and now let's flip things around and talk about the biggest losers, a couple of which don't even show up in the patch notes. The first is the Georgians, who are having their cavalry HP regeneration bonus nerfed. It's a small enough change objectively that I don't think it'll tank the civ by any means, and the free mule cart probably has more to do with their early strength that we're seeing in the stats. They'll still win one-on-one scout fights, for example, but beyond that, healing has a nice advantage throughout the game, and Georgians are one of the losers of the patch. I think it expands further than that though, with a more general class of civilizations losing out, including Georgians, for all scout rushing civilizations. First, the men-at-arms discount is tough for a unit that struggles against those head-to-head, and more men-at-arms out earlier isn't necessarily ideal from the perspective of scouts. The second and more important factor, though, are the changes coming to Arabia, which I think were overshadowed by the civilization balance changes and were somewhat buried in the later part of the patch notes. A number of things have happened to that map, with forests being made larger, the farthest forest being pushed in, spawn distances between players being more unpredictable, as well as a chance for unpushable hunt animals, with the new wild chickens replacing deer. Combined, that can mean easier walling with more trees, being tougher to find opponents who might potentially be further away, plus a chance for no deer pushing, and having to make up that food elsewhere. For a civ going in expecting to scout rush, that's a lot of things that could be suddenly working against you. Mongols are probably hit the hardest because of the potential of needing to mill your chickens or forego your important early hunt bonus, but I think all civs set up for scouts as their default plan and reliant on early timing are hit by this, particularly for players who always push deer and are used to having the initiative with their scout play. The counter argument is milling chickens might also lead to more villager picks for scouts, so it's maybe not quite as clear cut as I'm making it sound, and should at least require more adaptability from players. Next up, another loser in the patch are the Khmer, due to the Ballista Elephant attack being dropped, as well as a last-minute change reducing the attack of Scorpions in favor of a bit more bonus damage. This won't be a huge deal in 1v1 Arabia, but on team games across all maps, Khmer got a big bump last October when Ballista Elephants and Scorpions started to benefit from ballistics. While I don't think the Arabia stats will change very much, if at all, the late game snowball on Arena and Black Forest is hit by those changes, and is one of the few civs to be specifically targeted by a nerf. They have to get a nod on this list. Moving on, a less obvious loser in this patch are the Hindustanis. That might sound a bit random, as they didn't technically have any changes, but keep in mind they're consistently among the weakest against infantry civs. They're designed around being anti-archer and anti-cavalry between their unique units and camel focus, but don't have the same obvious answers to infantry civs. They're also a bit slow out of the gate, so a push for infantry, earlier arson, and just more aggression early is exactly what they wouldn't have asked for this patch, and I think will highlight some of their vulnerabilities. So those are what I expect to be some of the biggest losers in the patch, and I know what you're thinking. There weren't that many hot takes for a bold prediction video, and that's where the last category comes in, which is the nothing burgers. That is, these are apparent buffs and nerfs that I don't think make it into a biggest winner or loser category, but their omission makes for an interesting discussion anyway. The first nothing burger I'm calling is for cavalry archer civs, who had their training time bumped from 34 to 37 seconds for the non-heavy cavalry archer. Obviously, cavalry archers are quite popular the last little while, but I don't expect this change to move the needle or even show up in the stats. If this was a unique unit from a castle, I'd change my tune, but it just doesn't seem that hard to add in one more archery range to more than offset this. And while maybe at the highest levels this can have an impact, for 1600 elo and down, I just don't think this shows up in win rates. My other nothing burger hot take is that Burgundian Flemish militia won't be a game changer for the civilization. I admit maybe I'm sleeping on this unit, but I would put it that I'm at least not confident saying this is going to be a big buff for them. On paper, it seems like a good unit against cavalry civs, being a mix of the anti-cav aspect of pikemen with more generalist swordsman stats. But even against good cavalry civs, I think it gets stopped by a knight and skirmisher pairing, simply because they take bonus damage like a spearman from skirmishers and crossbows. I could be wrong about it, and I'm curious to look at the unit more closely, but my first instinct is I don't know what role it fits into, given it brings a lot of the weaknesses of the swordsman line with an extra vulnerability to skirmishers. Arguably, a Burgundian going cavalry and Flemish militia versus a knight and camel mix is one situation it could find itself worked in. But even in that case, why would I choose it over pikemen, which would do close to double the damage per attack against both of these units? The fact it's just 30 food and gold is probably the best argument. I'm underestimating its impact, but I'm just not confident putting Burgundians into the biggest winners category despite what's functionally a brand new unit line throughout the game. I admit there is some cognitive dissonance of giving the benefit of the doubt to Koreans, Vietnamese, and Chinese on the Fire Lancer and not for Burgundians and this unit. But those are just my thoughts and predictions of how things are going to play out. Balance is always a very difficult thing to forecast, but we'll check back in a month or two and see how accurate this all is. If you want to get your own hot takes locked in below, I'll even follow up on some of the more popular ones in the comments when the stats begin to settle. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.